Okay, we're ready. Rules and regulations, the dreaded ones. Haven't even written in my notes. Okay, operating standards. Well, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this, as long as our computer over there and John will help out by operating a radio. We've already talked about frequency and emission privileges. What we're going to learn this time is new or modified amateur frequency privileges. There's a table in 3.1 in your book. Exclusive HF privileges, table 3.2, or see the color chart. Staying in the band, or another no-no. We have to make sure that we stay in the band, and that's something I want to describe to you shortly. CW, upper sideband, lower sideband, AM and FM. Let's see what these mean first. Okay, first we're going to show you AM. That's amplitude modulation. John, can you just key the transmitter, not speak into it? Now notice right here, this point that's sticking out. That is the carrier for AM. Now go ahead and speak into the microphone, John.
This is here for RTK.
This is the zero here is the center frequency, or it's the carrier. And when he talks, you can see modulation on the high frequency side, and you can see on the low frequency side or lower sideband. You've heard of single sideband. They talk about upper sideband and lower sideband. So this side is upper sideband, and this side is lower. But since this is AM, all the signal, half of the power is actually going into this carrier. So John, go ahead and speak into it again. So you see you got power here and you got power over here. So this is your biggest power, probably about half here and a quarter here and a quarter here. So switch it to upper sideband.
I'm on upper sideband. You want just the carrier?
No, yeah, speak into it.
Just 1, 2, 3, 4. This is upper sideband.
Now with upper sideband, there is no carrier, and it just transmits the upper frequencies of your voice. So that's single sideband, and the radio puts back in the carrier and demodulates it. So let's go to lower sideband. So, well, hey, stay on upper sideband. Go ahead and speak into it.
This is KFK.
You notice right here, this is zero frequency. This is where the carrier would be, and all the signals on the upper side. So that's upper sideband. Okay, now switch to lower sideband. And I'm going to notice this is where the carrier would be, and this is lower sideband. Okay, now you know something. This is one thing that we did not try. I don't know if it's going to work. Switch back to upper sideband. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I'm the one. I'm the one who needs to go to upper sideband. Okay, notice this tone. That's my signal generator. And I'm going to put this at what I'm going to call the upper side of the oh, that's too much. We can call that, and just for reference, this is going to be the high side of the band. So if we place this, I need a little more. If we place this over here, now John, go ahead and talk.
This is KF4RTK on.
Notice all the signals here, and if this is the upper side of the band, he's well within that band.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we move the band to here, now speak.
Oh, sorry. 54321.
Now notice his signal is here, and it's also going outside of the band. So you notice that the band, if we go up here to 3, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's 3 kc. Go ahead and speak. So you can see the signals within the band at 3 kc. So, but he's right on the edge. Talk loud, kind of loud.
3, 4, 5.
Now see, he talked loud, and it's actually coming out over here outside of the band.
So then he is illegal.
Correct. And same thing on the other bands. If you're on 80 meters, you're worried about the low side of the band, and if you're on the upper sideband channels, you're worried about the upper side. So anyway, that's the thing that we're trying to avoid. So I would recommend that you not operate within 5 kc of the band.
The band edge.
The band edge, correct. The band edge. Well, that went a little better than I expected. Okay, it's back to me. Now, John,
Yes.
do you want to explain what your radio does? Remember we talked about this earlier today, the band edge thing?
Oh, I have a ICOM 7300, and there's a feature on there that prevents you from talking outside of your band area. If I try to go below where I'm allowed to go in my class, it does not let me transmit, but I do have to program that in. And so if I'm on 80 meters, and the lower edge of 80 meters for me is, I should know this by heart, but I don't. 3,700, is that right?
Yeah. So
I think that's correct.
Or 3.7. Anyway, whatever the lower edge is, if I tune lower than that, the transmit feature goes away. So that's one way of doing what Joe's talking about to prevent transmitting outside of your band. But even then, I can be within, like you said, 5 kc of the lower end and still be in transmit range, but still have that possibility of transmitting outside. I can't tune outside of it, but I think it'll still let me transmit outside of it if I'm tuned in my legal area, but I'm not sure about that. I know that if I try to go outside of it, it won't let me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
very well.
It does, but that's your radio is a fairly modern one. It's a software defined radio, and it's mostly digitized. So it has a microprocessor in it, and you can program things to do that. But now here is the chart. So we're talking about the band edges. And let's just use 40 meters here. Thank you, Scott, for making me think of getting a big pointer so people can see it. Here's the high end of 40 meters, which is 7.3 megahertz. So you would not, this is lower sideband. Your signal is going from your carrier lower. So you can get your carrier pretty close to 7.30 megahertz and do that. But if you're down here on the low end of the band, your signal is below your carrier. So you want to set your carrier above this frequency, either right here, or if you're a general, right here at this point right here. Is everybody following me?
Yeah, Joe, I'm just going to interject here that the correct answer on the amateur extra exam is within 3 kilohertz. I think 5 is a nice safe rule, but just so folks don't get confused, it's actually 3 kilohertz in the question pool.
Good, thank you. I'm very conservative.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And any questions about this particular part of the? Nope. Yeah. Oh, go
You
ahead.
can legally listen to anything you want, right?
Right.
Just when you hit that keys.
Right. You don't want to transmit. Right. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah. You can listen anywhere, but you're licensed to transmit in only certain places.
you.
So, in my demo, which I just gave, okay, special operating rules. Now I have to go to my notes. Automatic message forwarding. When you are using a radio system, help me out, Daron, here.
Store and forward, like WinLink or something?
Yes. Yes, WinLink is exactly what we're talking about here. You have to stay within the rules, the amateur rules. And that means no business. You cannot normally conduct business over the radios, especially if it's for a third party. You also cannot use foul language, which some people do.
I tend to once in a while.
So, but with the business thing, if you're on a sailboat and you are needing a part and you order that part over the radio, that is acceptable. That is not going to gain a profit for you or your boss, which is the main thing that they're looking for, because there are commercial means for obtaining those things through your telephone or commercial radio or other things. So avoid doing business on amateur radio. I mean, if you're talking to your wife and she's gone to the store, you can tell her to be sure to pick up some pickles, right? That's fine. You're not going to gain anything from that. But
Pickles?
pickles is correct.
So you can speak with other entities, but not on a regular basis for that kind of activity, right?
What,
Like say, you want to talk to your garage mechanic who's working on your vehicle. You can talk with that person about that vehicle, and it will be to your benefit to get it done. in his
Well,
pocket.
yeah, but I don't think that's really what's going on.
Okay.
And well, I know one mechanic who is a ham, but if your friend happens to be there with his handy talkie, you can talk to him and work things out. I think that's fine, but I don't, Darren, do you have any comments on that?
You know, it's it's one of those things that comes up all the time. I think just be reasonable about it. You know, you can take it to the letter of the law and over analyze it, but generally just avoid the business aspect wherever you can with that, unless it's specifically about amateur radio. If I call Joe and want to purchase an amplifier from him, I can probably take that offline, but that's an amateur radio thing between him and I, and it's usually okay. Just use some common sense and be aware if someone says, hey, you shouldn't do that over the radio, cease operation and don't do it.
Yeah, but you could not, for instance, a friend says, hey, can you call your friend and see if he'll buy my truck?
Can't do that.
That's not something I would do.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, racist operations, radio amateur civil emergency service. If you are involved in races or ACEs or ACE or
So
I'm sorry,
ACS.
ACS, you must only operate where you are legally licensed to do so. So if you're a technician, you cannot get on 80 meters and start broadcasting. There is an exception, Darren. You know what that is?
Way to put me on the spot. No.
Yeah, no, okay. If you are actually in an emergency, a true emergency, and there is life or public property or property that'll be damaged, and you have a true emergency, you can operate anywhere. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just interject one thing there about that? Because that has gotten people excited about being able to just use the radio however they wish. I posed that exact question to Riley Hollingsworth at CPAC. Riley Hollingsworth was the FCC attorney, and he was a guest at the CPAC convention. And I said, what is your take on that phrase? And his explanation was, you're driving down the road and you see a police officer off his car off in the ditch and the officer is injured. You jump out of your car to help, your cell phone doesn't work, you don't have your ham radio, you grab his public safety radio and you call for help for him. That's the type of thing that phrase is meant to cover.
Right.
If you purchase radios that you're not licensed to use and you program them on frequencies you are not licensed to use, anticipating on using them in emergency, that is a premeditated act to break the law, in his opinion. So
well, I have heard the same thing.
Wow.
I thought it was a fair interpretation of the rule, because people say, well, in an emergency, I can talk on anything I want. Well, maybe, but if you're planning to do that, that is not what that rule is meant to do.
Gotcha. Very good.
Well, I have a comment on that also.
Go
It
ahead.
even applies to guys in Otis, Don.
There was some fires down in California or Colorado, I think, and he was a ham, and he tuned into the helicopter's frequency and was trying to tell the helicopters where to drop the water. Well, yeah, he was helping, but he got fined $19,000.
Right. We had similar things in Tillamook County with a couple of hams who thought they would help the fire department by getting on their frequency and trying to help them out. That's not helpful.
No.
No.
Darren, I like your earlier explanation, which is the kind of thing and the reason that you would do it. But anyway, stations aboard ships and aircraft. Now, I sailed to the Marshall Islands, halfway across the Pacific, just north of the equator, and I operated an amateur radio. station on the boat that we were on. We checked into the Pacific Maritime Net, which is at 14,300 every day. And that was a very good thing to have. And if we had failed to check in for 2 or 3 days, they would have started looking for us. And so it's a wonderful thing to do, but you can put radios on boats, you can put them on airplanes, and there's only one restriction. You have to have the permission of the pilot or the guy who's in charge of the boat to do so. If you own the boat, you can give yourself permission to do so. But are there any questions to this point? Okay, station restrictions, operating restrictions. If you interfere with a television, generally it is the TV's fault. But if they determine that the TV has been properly built with proper filters and can eliminate strong nearby signals, and you're interfering with them, they can, the FCC can tell you to restrict your transmissions. In the book, it gives very specific details on that, but that's a very rare occurrence because most TVs do not have that kind of protection. However, and this is just me talking, if you're getting into your neighbor's TV, see if you can figure out why. Very often it's you pick it up through the power cord or through the antenna lead. If you put a choke on it, that will very often cure it. If it's getting into their stereo, you put chokes on their on the speaker wires, that will often cure your problem. So, but generally speaking, you are not required to do so, but you can make an enemy.
You blow up somebody's TV, you're gonna make an enemy.
Yeah, well, that's how you get along as a ham with your neighbors. Although I had a neighbor who lived about 3 blocks away come and try to accuse me of interfering with his stereo, and and I hadn't been on the air for weeks. So anyway, you can work those things out. Spurious emissions. When you transmit, your radio or your amplifier will put out signals other than what it should be doing. Those are called spurious emissions. Now, the FCC requires today, after 2003, that they be 43 dB down at 3, I think it's at 3 kilohertz out. So if you're at 14,300, 14,303 is as far as you go out, and you measure how far down your signal is. Remember earlier when we were doing my demonstration? You know that the signal, here's the carrier, and then it would come up and it would work its way down like this, down to 3 kilohertz. After 3 kilohertz, the signal that comes up, and remember when John talked real loud and that signal came up? You want to make sure that that's 43 dB below 3 kilohertz out. Those are your spurious emissions. If you here, let's say that you've got a transceiver, barefoot, 100 watts, and you're running that into a linear amplifier that'll put out 1500 watts. And you start out and you set your level that you're driving the amplifier such that it has a normal output. But then let's say you get real excited and you start shouting and you overdrive that transmitter. When you overdrive it, you will cause it to create unnecessary spurious emissions. And there's folks later, we're going to get into real close detail on how this stuff occurs. But keep in mind, anybody that's listening, I mean, especially you new people, if you ever get an amplifier or something, you want to learn how to use it properly. So next are station location and antenna structures. Wildlife Preserve or National Register of Historic Places. If you are in one of those, you must get permission to put up an antenna and transmit. The details are in the book. If you are within 1 mile of an FCC monitoring facility, you have to get permission to operate in that area. And so you talk to those people and find out, make sure that you're not interfering with their work. More restrictions. Station location and antenna structures continued. How many have heard of PRB-1? I see a couple hands out there. This is a what, Rose?
It's a rule, isn't it?
It's a new law. Put out a fairly new law. And what it requires that regulations consider the needs of an amateur. In other words, if you are in an HOA, homeowners association, they cannot just tell you, no, you cannot have an antenna. They have to take into consider reasonable antenna locations so that you can put one up. And it has created buku fights. So I live in an HOA community, but the man who formed that community was an extra class ham.
So lucky.
And when I moved in, I was not operating at all and was not doing anything with amateur radio. And later when I got interested in it, I discovered this. I actually went to the board and I have a written letter that gives me permission to put up a 60-foot tower. So things can be worked out, but some places the people just get downright nasty. And it can get pretty ugly, but remember, there are some laws that do protect you. So hang in there. Antennas cannot normally be, for amateur radio use, cannot be over 200 feet. But you have to get, now 200 feet's a very big tower. Pardon?
20 stories.
Yeah. Yeah. So most of us don't have to worry about that. You can apply and get permission to, but you have to put lights on it and do all kinds of things. And there are restrictions near a public airport. So there is information that tells you how high you can go and everything else. You can, generally speaking, if you do not go more than 20 feet above any of the trees and or
Mountains.
no, not mountains, but buildings, structures that have been put in. Okay, next.
A question?
Hey, yes, question.
I'm a little confused about this location of, like you talked about designated wilderness areas and not being able to have an antenna. You have to get permission for an antenna. I'm assuming you're not talking about a handheld, are you?
Oh, no. No.
You can take a handheld with an antenna into a wilderness preserve area without permission, correct?
Correct. Yeah, but this would be setting up a permanent station with an antenna. And
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
yeah. Station control. There are local controls, remote controls, telecommand one-way, automatic control, telemetry. Station control is simply, oops, there we go. Local control is simply if you're sitting there at your radio turning the knobs, that's local control. Remote control, the control for the radio is no longer at the radio, it's from somewhere else. If you're using a computer and equipment to control it, radio equipment is rare, but you can use radio equipment to control it. That's remote control. Telecommand is a one-way transmission to initiate, modify, or terminate functions of a device at a distance. You can have an internet cable or Wi-Fi or wired for a wire line connection for earth stations, and earth stations are stations that are under 50 kilometers high. It's about 30 above the ground. So anything lower than that is considered an earth station. If you are operating those, you need to have a photocopy of your license, a station license info, and also an operator info on the station that's doing the transmitting. Now, and for drones, we all are, well, not maybe all of us are familiar with RC, radio control, airplanes and cars and boats. Also, what we call drones now, or the quadcopters, the little helicopters. I built one and I can't fly it. A major problem in the building. When I built it, great, but I can't fly it. Anyway, you're limited to 1 watt, and the station, the transmitter has to have the station information on it. In other words, your call sign and your name and number and how people can get in contact with you has to be on the transmitter. So if you get into that, just remember that. But what I just recommend, if you get involved in any of these things, go to the book and look it up and study it, make sure you get it right. And 5 minutes.
On that subject,
Yes.
the product, the helicopter, whatever, also has to have that information on it too, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, it does. It has to have your call sign and your contact information. So space stations, that will be explained in 3.4, which is the next section. Automatic control, repeaters. Daron, any comments?
Yeah, can I just run through for about 2 minutes or so here?
Yes.
So the repeater automatically retransmits you. There's no one sitting up there to flip the switch. So someone has to assume liability for what goes out over the air, and that's the owner operator of the repeater to some extent. There is required to be a control point so that if for some reason I hear someone using profanity on one of the repeaters, I'm required as the control operator to shut the repeater down so that doesn't continue. So there needs to be a method to do that. And that's usually done via radio. And if it is done via radio, that control link has to be above 220 megahertz. So if we have a VHF repeater, the control link needs to be above 220. So it's generally done on 70 centimeters. If that link fails for any reason, I'm required to have a timer on the repeater that doesn't allow it to just transmit continuously for longer than 3 minutes. So you'll typically have a timeout timer on the repeater that will stop it after 2 or 3 minutes, because that assumes that there's a problem where someone has just pressed the button too long. There are control operators for most repeaters that try to monitor the repeater and make sure everybody's doing things correctly. If you have any doubt, it's best to contact the owner of the repeater and ask them what the rules or guidelines are. Some folks have very strict guidelines. Some are very open about how they want their repeater run, but it is up to the owner of that repeater to set those rules. And the FCC has shown through enforcement that they will back the owner up. So if the owner says, I don't want John Moore on my repeater because he said bad words and was doing bad things, the FCC will back that up and say, John, you need to stay off that repeater, as an example. So be polite, be nice. If you have a question, ask somebody about it rather than just operate poorly.
They're good for you. You took advantage of
Sorry, I got a couple more here. I'm almost
your
done.
pet peeves.
Coordination for amateur radio repeaters is done on a regional basis. I chair the organization that does Oregon and Southwest Washington. So if you want to put a repeater up, it's suggested that you get coordination by this body of people, which is all repeater owners. So we make sure that there's not harmful overlap between repeaters on the same frequency. It works out better for everybody.
Yep.
It's not required, but if you cause a problem from an uncoordinated repeater to a coordinated repeater, the FCC will generally ask the non-coordinated repeater to shut down. The other thing to remember is something you may not understand, but a lot of people encourage DXing the repeaters, trying to get as far as you possibly can from the repeater and operating it. And the problem that causes is that if you're working our 145.37 repeater on Otter Crest from Salem, you are also causing noise on the Vancouver 145.37, as well as the Blue River 145.37 repeater, because you're in the middle of those coverage areas. So while it might be kind of fun to hear somebody from out of our area on our local repeater, it's generally frowned upon because it causes interference to other repeaters in other areas. That was it.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions for Daron?
Yeah, I have a question. So if you want to, how do you find out who the owner of a repeater is? Does the repeater book give you that information?
The call sign of the repeater, you should be able to look up on qrz.com or one of the other services and see who owns that call sign.
Okay.
You can also go to the orrc.org. That's the Oregon Region Relay League, or the coordinating body. I can put that in the chat for you.
Okay.
And you can look at all the coordinated repeaters there and what the call signs associated with them are.
Thank you.
All right, we're out of time. But I do want to cover telemetry, and that's just very amateur radios can be used to conduct experiments and make measurements. Information sent one way is telemetry. You must contain your call sign of the transmitting station. And Daron, you've done some of that, have you not?
We do a fair amount of that on APRS and Packet now. We transmit weather data as well as radio telemetry from the radio site showing what the battery voltage is and all that. And every packet has got the call sign on it.
Well, very good. Well, you know, I had hoped to get all the way through this, but we still got 3.4, 0.5, and 0.6. So that's where we will start next week. And I need everybody to have their little packets next week, because after that, I'm going to put Daron to work.
Oh, Joe. Okay, that'll be interesting.
So we should start having fun. We're going to start studying the stuff that I like to teach. So anyway, God bless all of you and thank you and good night.